6th of February 1945, Gross Teichau, Pomerania. The whistle is a wire pulled through cold air, and Eddie Callahan steps into the yard of Stalag Luft 4 with his blanket stiff as bark. Frost pins his boots to the planks. When he pries them free, the leather creaks. Guards in grey-shoulder carabiner 98K rifles, 5-round magazines topped off with gloved thumbs, bayonets winking without warmth. The stove in Barrack 5 went cold 2 nights ago. A man would have traded a wedding ring for a handful of coal. Across an ocean, at Papago Park, Arizona, steam blooms against concrete. Lieutenant Carl Weber, late Africa Corps, stands in a line that smells of lye and hot iron. An American corporal with an M1 Garand, 8 rounds, on-block clip, keeps an easy watch as valves chatter open. By regulation, there will be showers, not a rumour, not a kindness, doctrine. The Geneva Convention of 1929, written in pipe and pressure and schedules that never seem to slip. The gates clang in Pomerania. The column forms. Eddie tucks a shard of Red Cross chocolate in his glove and follows the sound of wooden clogs on snow. Breath fogs into a low cloud that moves when the guards move. Somewhere ahead, someone coughs the dry cough of a man whose lungs have learned winter. Behind him, a British kid mutters a prayer that sounds like a checklist. Papago's bathhouse hisses. Weber notices the light. Constant, unflickering fluorescent tubes fed by a generator that seems to notice the load. He is issued canteen scrip, 80 cents a day, he is told, to be spent at a store inside the wire. He nods, ashamed of the hunger that spikes at the word bread. Orders are orders. The Americans say it like a promise and make it true with pipe wrenches and fuel deliveries. Eddie's column shuffles through the gate onto a road that's been white for a month. The guards' boots bite the crust. The prisoners' clogs skate and scrape. Wind threads through wool, unweaving what warmth remains. A man in front drops a glove and does not turn back. Somewhere, the Red Army is a weather front of metal, and the Luftwaffe has decided the safest way to keep these men is to keep them moving. Valves close in Arizona. Steam twists itself thin and disappears. Weber dries with a towel stamped USARMY and reads the date stitched into the hem, last year. Newer than anything he owns. He will tell himself later that the shower meant nothing. For the moment, heat scours argument from his skin. Eddie looks for a horizon and sees only white. The road swallows sound. The guards do not hurry. He pulls the chocolate to his teeth, lets a fraction melt, and saves the rest. That is how you live out here. 1 square, 1 step, 1 breath in air that cuts like glass. Camp Hearn, Texas, January 1945. First Lieutenant Ruth Ellison, Army Nurse Corps, balances a clipboard on her forearm and checks the boiler gauge. Pressure steady, feed water within limits, chlorination tablets logged by lot number. She has learned the poetry of maintenance, recovery rate, service interval, gallons per man per day, and she treats it the way field surgeons treat blood, as life moved by schedule. The War Department says parity with US base camp standards. She signs that promise with a stub pencil that still leaves a clean line. Across the Atlantic, Feldwebel Otto Reimann closes his office door against a draft that seems to come through the paper. Stalag 9B's requisitions for coal have gone unanswered again. He tightens his greatcoat and studies a map dotted with arrows that no longer mean reinforcements. Overcrowding has become a number he cannot turn back. New Americans from the Ardennes, thin-cheeked, eyes raw with fatigue. He would have moved them to warmer blocks, but there are none. He files what he can file and rubs his temples until the map blurs. Ruth walks the perimeter. Double fences throw long morning shadows. The towers have potbelly stoves for the guards, and the men inside them sip burned coffee and talk baseball across the wire. In the bathhouse, a civilian mechanic replaces a valve seat with a practiced twist. It is not luxury, it is compliance, and compliance is strategy. She notes the day's intake, Another work detachment returned from the citrus groves, and the small commerce of scrip and soap in the canteen. 80 cents a day buys a dignity you can count in bars of soap and sheets of stationery. Ryman inventories what dignity remains: a stove that can't be fed, a crate of socks with more holes than wool, 2 medics too old for the front and too tired for the night. He's no sadist. He's a functionary with a dwindling function, and he knows the prisoners can see the edges fray. He stamps the day's forms harder than he needs to, because the sound proves something is still solid. Ruth signs off on the day's chlorination and folds her ledger shut. She remembers her brother somewhere in Europe and tells herself, as she always does, that rules keep men alive, even men in enemy grey. The generator hums. Laundry tumblers start their slow roll like planets that can be trusted. At 9B, Ryman opens the door again. The wind carries a grain of snow that melts on his cheek and leaves a track like sweat. He tells himself the cold will break tomorrow. He told himself that yesterday. Outside, men with wooden clogs stamp to keep blood from freezing shy of their toes. He writes one more request for coal and does not expect an answer. Still, he writes it. The ink thickens in the nib between words and dares him to stop. 27th January 1945, Stalag 9A, Ziegenhain. Morning inspection lines turn to stillness when a pistol comes out. Master Sergeant Roddy Edmonds, 422nd Infantry, 106th Division, straightens as the German officer demands the Jews step forward. He says, steady as a man reading a regulation, "We are all Jews here." The sentence drops like a wrench onto concrete, sharp, functional, irreversible. The pistol doesn't move, neither does Edmonds. Somewhere inside the commandant, arithmetic begins. News travels by rumour and memory. A British private repeats the line 2 weeks later to Eddie Callahan in a frozen barn, and Eddie lets it sit in his chest like a coal that will not go out. He would have said it himself, he thinks, if he'd had the rank, the moment, the breath. What he has is a column, an order to march, and a winter that makes liars of optimists. At Papago Park, Carl Weber learns the canteen schedule. He buys soap and a pencil with scrip that reads like money, even if it isn't. The towers are heated, and the floodlights don't flicker when the projector starts for Wednesday's film. He considers indignation and finds warmth more persuasive. The camp's light is a fact you can read by. Facts, he realises, have weight. Impossible statistics lurk behind quiet routines. By May 1945, the United States will be holding 425,000 Axis prisoners, more men behind American wire than many nations could have mobilized, all processed through camps that mandate showers, medical care, and work. In the same span, US yards will have turned out 2,710 Liberty ships and American factories 296,000 military aircraft. A single nation heating water for its enemies while outbuilding continents. Numbers that feel like fiction until you see them measured in valves, ledgers, and ton-miles of soap. Eddie's road narrows where drifts have swallowed the ditches. The guards keep the pace of men who have learned that speed is a kind of mercy. The slower you go, the deeper the cold reaches. He watches for the flash of a window, for a farmer willing to risk soup and a curse. Sometimes a barn door opens. More often, it doesn't. The rules here are different. Warmth is contraband, and coal is a strategic resource spent on steel, not stoves. Weber folds his towel and thinks of the desert sun outside the barracks. He had believed superiority was a matter of spirit and steel alone. Now he adds plumbing to the list, reluctantly, accurately. Edmonds's sentence has crossed the ocean by rumour, and Weber does not know it yet, but the two facts rhyme. Rules kept like orders, and orders kept like promises. Eddie marks the rumour in his head as if it were an order. We are all Jews here. He repeats it once, lips barely moving, and breath makes the words visible in air so cold it polices speech. He files the sentence beside his square of chocolate, a ration of courage to be spent later, 6 to 20 February 1945. The column leaves Gross-Teichau ahead of the Red Army's metal weather, a line of men stitched to the horizon by breath. Eddie counts by fours, the old cadence of an air crewman tracking minutes to target. Every fourth step he tests his toes for feeling. Snow squeaks at 15 below, and today it squeaks, which means the cold has teeth. When a man falls, 2 men lift him, because if he sits, he will sleep, and if he sleeps, he will leave the column by inches. Back in Arizona, Carl Weber learns the time it takes to move a camp through a shower cycle. 100 men in, 100 men out, valves opening in a rhythm that could be set to a metronome. He spends his script on a notebook. His handwriting returns with heat. On a farm detail, he will likely dig irrigation furrows with a short-handled shovel and learn that citrus groves drink like soldiers on payday. American civilians teach him new words and the knot of a bandana. The work is not punishment, it is policy. Ruth Ellison rides out in a CCKW 2.5-ton truck to inspect a branch camp. The 6x6 climbs gravel without complaint, its inline-6 engine humming at a pitch that means maintenance is being done right. She logs chlorine residue at the cistern, confirms guards' tower stoves are fueled, skims a requisition for towels, approves it. Logistics are tactics written in ledger lines. Depot to railhead, railhead to truck, truck to valve, valve to warmth. She would not write it that way, but she lives it that way. The Germans are evacuating camps to stay ahead of the Soviet tide. On paper, it makes sense. In weather, it becomes a slow-motion attrition. Eddie sees men's ears turn waxy and pale. He would share his chocolate, but he already did. A farmhouse appears like a rumour. The column doesn't turn. He files away the lesson that survival is sometimes obedience measured in footsteps. Weber returns from the fields with dirt under his nails and a word in his mouth the Americans call chow. He lines up for the bathhouse and stares at the manifold, thick pipe, flanged joints, bolts cinched to torque. It looks like a machine that cannot fail because too many other machines feed it, boilers, pumps, trucks, rails, ships. He cannot see the ocean from Arizona, but the steam knows the way back to the sea. Ruth signs her inspection with that tidy pencil line. The driver eases the CCKW into second, and the truck's bed shivers, full of folded towels that will be clean again tomorrow. Eddie sleeps that night in a barn that smells of mice and old straw and something like mercy. When he wakes, the column is already forming, and the road is still white. Ruth briefs 2 new nurses in a mess tent that smells of coffee grounds and diesel. We treat them well because we are us, she says, and because our men are over there. She does not quote the Geneva Convention of 1929, but she could. The articles are stamped into every schedule she keeps. Housing, hygiene, medical attention, bathing. Each requirement becomes a checklist, each checklist a promise that turns into a truck route and a storeroom key. Her finger traces a wall map from depot to camp like a quartermaster's route drawn in pencil and repeated until it becomes muscle memory. In Hesse, Feldwebel Reimann reads his transport updates and feels strategy collapse into weather. Rail schedules are fiction now. Coal allocations arrive in numbers that insult the paper. He is no ideologue. He was good at forms, a precise man in a precise system. Precision fails when the inputs vanish. He knows the prisoners are cold, and he knows the guards are cold, and he knows the choice has fallen from his hands to the sky. Ruth tours the bathhouse. A mechanic explains recovery rate, the time a water heater needs to bring the tank back to temperature after a draw. She nods. Numbers like that make mercy repeatable. She checks laundry throughput, the way towels cycle through wash, wring, dry, fold, issue, and back again. To an outsider, it would look like kindness. To her, it looks like control. Control saves lives. Behind all of it hums a chorus of machines, generators in their shacks tuning a steady note, trucks shuttling supplies on roads that seem to grow new lanes, rails humming with freight from ports where liberty ships have backed down from ways like clockwork. In 1944 alone, American factories built nearly 96,000 aircraft, yet the bathhouse lights never dim. Production isn't an abstraction. It is the guarantee that the next towel is clean and the next valve is hot. Ryman stands in the doorway of a barracks and reads the room the way an infantryman reads ground. Stoves, bunks, faces, the frost crusting the eaves. He would have ordered more coal if there had been coal. He orders calm instead. The men obey because they are soldiers and because obedience makes hours move. He thinks of the enemy across the ocean making warmth for prisoners as if warmth were cheap. He hates them for that, and he respects them for that, and the two feelings knot until he cannot tell them apart. Ruth ends her brief with a sentence she has begun to believe is a piece of doctrine. Reliability is how we keep promises. She will likely never meet the men those promises are meant to protect. She signs the day's requisitions. Somewhere far away, a train brings soap. Somewhere closer, a nurse opens a valve and steam answers like a well-drilled unit coming to attention. They call it Schlaraffenland in the barracks, a fairy tale land of milk and honey, and Karl Weber hates the softness of the word until he cannot deny the heat under his skin. Wednesday night is film night, and the projector's fan whirs as the beam catches dust motes and turns them into snow that does not bite. The towers have stoves. The guards stamp their feet and sip something that tastes like burned coffee. The bathhouse manifold ticks as pressure equalizes. He hears the drip in the trap and the generator's steady hum from its shack. He had been taught that superiority was a blade, spirit, steel, shock. In Arizona, he discovers another definition that an engineer would recognize: redundancy, capacity, recovery time. The Americans do not merely have hot water, they can have it again and again on schedule. He spends scrip on white bread and soap and pencils and a postcard he may never send. He learns a word for the mess line, chow, that turns hunger into routine. The impossible numbers hum behind the ordinary. Over 500,000 2.5-ton trucks, the GMC CCKWs, have rolled off lines to haul everything from beans to boiler tubes. The nation built 2,710 Liberty ships, floating promises that ports would never be empty, and 296,000 military aircraft, with 1944's peak, an avalanche of wings the Luftwaffe could not match in fuel or pilots. In a good month, one US factory floor could outproduce what Germany managed in a hard season. A single depot's quarterly waste could outfit a German district: ruptured hoses, surplus soap, boots retired early, excess beside a stove that has no coal. He notices how the guards treat the checklist like scripture. Head count, hygiene, housing. The corporal with the Garand knows his weapon the way the mechanic knows a valve seat. The language of parts and pressure makes order feel simple. Weber does not stop being a soldier. He stops believing his army can win. It is a quiet surrender that begins not at a front line, but under a showerhead. Some nights he lies awake while the generator keeps its note and thinks about the desert sky. He would have preferred indignity. Indignity would have kept his anger hot. Instead, he is clean, and warmth is persuasive, and routine erodes defiance like water over stone. He is surprised to find respect rising where resentment was supposed to live. He keeps that to himself and folds his towel exactly in half, then in half again, the way the Americans showed him, as if precision were a bridge across the wire, a small discipline that makes a hostile place predictable. The projector clicks off. Steam loosens from the rafters. Somewhere beyond the fence, citrus trees drink in the black. Weber closes his eyes and admits what the numbers already said. The war was lost when the enemy could heat water without thinking about it. The road turns into a habit. Eddie Callahan counts his steps in sets of 4 the way he used to count seconds over a target. Every 4th step he flexes his toes inside socks stiff as shingles, asking for feeling like a man pleads for news. The column of Stalag Luft, 4 men moves as a single animal made of breath and stubbornness, shoulders brushed with frost. When they halt in a village, a barn door might open. More often it doesn't. The wind tastes of iron, and the guards' Carabiner 98KS look heavier each day as arms grow thinner. Feldwebel Reimann watches the evacuation orders stack up like snowdrifts and knows that on a map the march looks efficient. In weather, it looks like attrition in slow motion. He is not cruel, he is cold, and he has less coal than orders. He files more paperwork because the sound of the stamp still says authority. The men bake their hands over a single iron stove in a barn and pretend that heat can be counted in turns. They speak of Red Cross parcels the way pilots speak of home fields. Specific, remembered. Eddie has one square of chocolate left from before the march. He shares half with a British kid whose ears have gone waxy. He would have saved it for later. Later has stopped arriving on schedule. The snow squeaks underfoot at 15 below, the kind of sound that makes men believe the cold has teeth. Clatter of wooden clogs becomes metronome and mercy. Across the ocean, citrus furrows take POW blisters the way winter takes feelings from toes. Carl Weber learns to say ciao without thinking. The bathhouse manifold ticks. The generator holds its note. A 6x6 CCKW idles like a patient beast outside the fence. In Arizona, the routine polishes edges off fear. In Germany, the routine is fear with a schedule. Both are rules. Only one is warm. Reimann inventories stoves and finds himself counting metaphors. There are not enough hearts for the body, so you keep blood moving by keeping the men moving. He tells himself the Red Army dictates the pace. He tells himself that obedience is mercy because it prevents men from sitting down in snow they won't stand up from. A priest would have promised heaven. He promises a barn 3 kilometers ahead. Eddie swallows the last fleck of chocolate and feels the idea of sweetness more than the taste. He tells himself he will see a tank with a star painted on the hull before he forgets how to say his own name. The column starts again. Frost pulls threads from the breath cloud until the air is only air, and men are only men, and the road takes another hour the winter does not intend to give back. Ruth Ellison rides in the passenger seat of a CCKW 6x6 while the driver shifts the long lever like a man playing a hymn. The inline 6 engine hums steady. The truck's bed is stacked with towels folded into precise bricks, a geometry of hygiene. Dust pebbles the windshield and the mechanic, hitching a ride, talks about recovery rates and valve seats the way medics talk about pulse. Ruth fills her ledger as if each line were a tourniquet that stops chaos from hemorrhaging into the day. The branch camp appears. Double fences, towers with potbelly stoves, floodlights housed in steel cages. And beyond the wire a stretch of furrows where POWs bend, straighten, bend again. She notes chlorination levels at the cistern, checks the bathhouse, signs off on the boiler. Nothing here is luxury. It is all compliance, and compliance is strategy. Weber learns irrigation from a farmer who explains water like an officer explains a plan. Head, gate, flow, measure, keep it moving, don't waste, don't starve the tree. His palms split and heal in the same week. The word ciao slides into his mouth without resistance. He buys soap with scrip that looks like money in the way a uniform looks like a man. He folds his towel on the bunk the way the Americans showed him. In half, then half again, edges aligned as if order were contagious. The generator in its shack holds a single unwavering note. Somewhere far behind it, rails pulse with freight, and farther still, shipyards lift Liberty ships into water like factories exhaling hulls. Trucks multiply along roads like vertebrae along a spine, GMCCCKWs with canvas tops, low gears, and a patience that never seems to quit. Ruth traces a pencil line from port to railhead to depot to camp, then from camp to branch camp to bathhouse. Her finger taps the manifold. It is hot to the touch. She likes that. Heat you can verify is a promise kept. On the march, heat is a rumour. In Arizona, heat is a schedule. The difference is moral and mechanical at once. Ruth signs off inspections and teaches a young nurse the way to read a gauge by sound in case the bulb fails. Weber hears the tower stove ping as the metal cools in evening air. The farmer slaps him on the shoulder and says, tired but friendly, good work today. Weber is surprised that his mouth answers the same way. The driver starts the CCKW and the truck leans into second gear, towels shifting in a soft avalanche. Ruth watches the bathhouse shrink in the side mirror until the building becomes a square, then a tooth, then nothing. The hum of the engine does not fade. It is the sound of a system that intends to wake up tomorrow and do all of this again. The revelation doesn't arrive as a speech. It comes as a ledger. A quartermaster shows Ruth a column of numbers so clean they look like architecture. Towels issued, valves replaced, gallons heated, hours run without failure. He flips the page to a depot summary and laughs, not unkindly, at the entry labelled unserviceable, ruptured hoses, surplus soap, boots retired early. The totals would outfit a German district. Waste, he says, and shrugs, because in the American vocabulary of 1945, waste is a rounding error on abundance. Eddie hears a farmer's radio through a barn wall one night, a ghost of big band and static, and thinks how sound can make a room warmer by itself. He knows nothing of tonnage, but his bones believe someone somewhere is paying in steel to keep him alive by accident. The march keeps its slow arithmetic, kilometres traded for days, men traded for forward movement, and the guard's pace becomes a kind of kindness, because speed, like warmth, is a currency in winter. Weber watches a shipment of boots arrive at the camp and thinks about how far leather must travel to touch his feet. He understands that every pair contains a map: tannery, truck, rail, ship, rail, truck again, then a quartermaster's stamp. The generator thrums, the projector purrs on Wednesday, the bathhouse keeps its appointment with heat, the towers have stoves, the mess line moves as if governed by a metronome. He begins to understand redundancy as doctrine. Here is the impossible truth that would have sounded like propaganda if it weren't humming in the walls. By spring 1945, the United States has processed roughly 425,000 Axis POWs inside the continental US, heated water for them, laundered their towels, paid them scrip, and fed them on schedules that tie to locomotives and ledgers, while at the very same time building about 296,000 military aircraft and launching 2,710 Liberty ships. In 1944 alone, the aircraft count crested near 96,000. A single nation can warm its enemies and still outbuild empires. That is not softness. That is overmatch. Ryman runs his finger down a list of coal allocations that look like the shadow of a list. He chooses which barracks gets an extra scuttle as if he were a surgeon triaging warmth. He is ashamed of the threadbare grandeur of his army's slogans and proud of the men who still obey the cold. But the phrase that keeps him awake belongs to the enemy. Recovery time. He cannot recover what never arrives. Eddie sleeps with his back to a wall and his face in his sleeve. He dreams of a room that smells like lye and hot iron, and in the dream the valve opens on time. He wakes at a whistle and understands another truth that sounds like treason but isn't. Humaneness feels like victory when you are the one being warmed. The wire at Moosburg shivers with rumour before it moves with men. April 29th, 1945, and the sound Eddie has been hoarding finally arrives. Engines with confidence in them, American armour rolling up like a promise kept. The first tank appears with a white star, paint scuffed, turret shouldered like a boxer. Someone shouts, "Don't run," and they don't, because even joy needs orders. The gate buckles, the air changes. A GI hands Eddie a cigarette and a piece of bread that tastes like new clothes. Eddie's hands shake so hard he laughs at them. He is surprised to hear the laugh come out old. Across the ocean, Karl Weber folds towels in a bathhouse with steam on his face when the news walks in wearing a corporal's stripes. Germany has surrendered. The steam doesn't hesitate. The manifold ticks. The generator keeps its note. He places the towel on a shelf and sits on a crate because the idea needs a chair. The word surrender feels different when your skin is clean. He had rehearsed rage for years. It does not arrive. Instead, the arithmetic he has been doing in private tallies to zero. A nation that could heat water for its enemies could also heat steel for ships without blinking. The officer in him regrets. The man in him exhales. Ruth reads the message at the clinic desk and presses her pencil flat on the paper to stop her hand from shaking. She thinks of the ledgers that kept faith with valves, the scrip that bought soap, the CCKWs that moved towels like ammunition, and the nurses who memorized recovery rates like catechism. She writes demobilization checklists the same day because order is both comfort and habit. Trains will move men the other way now. She wants to go outside and breathe free air. She stays to balance the chlorine log. Ryman hears the news in a voice that won't rise above a murmur. He walks the length of a barracks and counts men as if the numbers will remain obedient. He's not sure what uniform looks like tomorrow. He understands he has been defeated by a country that could treat captives like patients and still arrive with tanks. He wants to be angry. He finds himself tired. At Moosburg, someone starts to sing and then stops, embarrassed because not even victory rescues pitch. Eddie tucks the bread into his cheek like a secret and stares at the tank's glacis plate. The world is metal and sun, and a taste his body will remember longer than it intends. The gate stands open. He steps through and feels heat find him from the inside out. Zoom out, and the map brightens with boilers instead of battles. By May 1945, the United States has taken custody of roughly 425,000 Axis POWs inside its own borders, processing them through camps that required showers, medical care and work details, backed by ledgers fluent in towels and tonnage. The figures stand shoulder to shoulder with the things they bought. About 296,000 military aircraft built across the war, with 1944 peaking near 96,000, 2,710 Liberty ships sliding into water like dates on a calendar, hundreds of thousands of GMC CCKW 2.5-ton trucks forming a rolling, repeating sentence of supply. The numbers are not decorations. They are grammar, and the war is the paragraph they wrote. Eddie Callahan learns to sleep on a mattress again and is startled by his own hands. They flex in peacetime like men leaving formation and waiting to be told what to do. He sees a mirror and thinks the glass is wrong. He smells coffee and motor oil and smiles at the order of it. The memory of the march does not dissolve. It slides into the background like a low drum that does not object to quiet. Carl Weber lines towels in a stack one last time before the inventory shifts to repatriation. He understands now that the routine which softened him was the same routine that crushed his army. Redundancy as strategy, capacity as doctrine, recovery time as advantage. The tower stoves are refueled again anyway. He catches himself admiring the efficiency. Admiration is not treason. It is a form of education. Ruth Ellison files her final boiler inspections of the season and thinks about how a schedule became a shield. She can measure victory in gallons heated and infections prevented as surely as divisions measured it in kilometers advanced. She knows reciprocity was part of the calculation, that by keeping faith with the Geneva Convention, America made a down payment on the safety of its own men. It didn't always pay back evenly, it paid enough to matter. She writes that in her notebook without flourish. There are other numbers that refuse to be merely statistical. American POWs in German custody suffered through a winter that could not be heated. In Japanese custody, the mortality rate rose to a cruelty measured in percentages rather than anecdotes. Context is not excuse, but it is clarity. The contrast with the US home front's discipline and abundance is stark to the point of indecency. In the same week Eddie's column searched barns for heat, Weber's camp scheduled showers that arrived on time. If you listen closely, you can still hear the generator's note under the roar of factories and the clatter of rails. The sound says reliability. Reliability is a weapon that doesn't aim at a man's chest. It aims at his calendar and keeps the appointment. Afterwards begins like a checklist. Eddie learns to stand in a grocery aisle without flinching at the abundance, then to rest his hand on a radiator without listening for the valve's breath. He marries in a suit that fits a little loose around the ribs and keeps a square of chocolate in a desk drawer longer than anyone would think reasonable. On cold mornings he still counts by fours on the walk to work, an old cadence with nothing to bomb and everything to build. He does not speak often about the march. When he does, he says the road was long and the stove was small and the wind was a policy. Karl Weber becomes a mason, then a city inspector, the sort of man who double-checks pressure relief valves and hears failure 2 days before it happens. He signs his name under diagrams with an exactness that would have pleased any American quartermaster. He still dislikes the word Schlaraffenland. He no longer doubts the arithmetic behind it. Warmth, rightly managed, becomes character. He teaches his son how to fold a towel in half, then in half again, edges aligned. Ruth Ellison teaches public health at a county school and writes on the board that doctrine is a way of keeping promises at scale. She draws a pipe, a valve, a tank, an arrow labelled recovery time, and explains the way reliability becomes mercy. Students ask about heroism. She answers that heroism is what a system requires when it has failed. Better to build systems that don't need it every day. She does not mean to diminish courage. She means to honour it with prevention. History keeps its ledgers. The Liberty ships still number 2,710. The aircraft totals still round to 296,000. The trucks still fill photographs like punctuation. The Axis POW count in US custody still presses past 400,000 by war's end. 1 yard could turn a freighter in 41 days, and then do it again, and again, and again. The impossible statistic is not that America outbuilt its enemies. It is that America heated water for them on schedule while it did. The memory sounds like a generator, steady and unashamed. Reimann disappears from the record in the way many precise men do when the systems that made them visible dissolve. He might have worked a desk. He might have opened a shop. He might have learned to fix a boiler. Somewhere, a valve closes on time, and no one thanks him. Somewhere else, a man steps into steam and believes in rules. The last page of the ledger rests under Ruth's palm. Eddie stands at a window and watches frost ferns on the glass and does not flinch. Weber clamps a gauge and nods at the steadiness of the needle. We did not choose heat because we were soft, the story says. We chose it because we intended to win and intended